I think anytime you have to rely on your authority, you disrupt the relationship. The best coaches that I'm around, when they have to correct behavior and try to influence the future behavior, instead of forcing compliance, they try to win influence.
Coach is really excited to be joined today by Brett Ledbetter of What Drives Winning. Brett, really grateful for your time today. And I would love it if we could start off and talk about how coaches in this modern sport landscape can create an environment, create a team that actually has this team first mentality, as sports and our society are so focused on the individual, from NIL to the transfer portal to social media. How can coaches create a team first mentality in the midst of that?
We studied how do leaders build an environment where people can do their best work. And one of the things that it came back to was three different things: how they define, manage, and model their expectations and vision as a leader. And so, if you're trying to attack the selfishness inside of a roster, then it's how do we show what unselfishness looks like? And that's the defining process. And then you close the gap of interpretation, and then there's a clarity around the standard. Once you have that, you now have drawn a line and delineated between winning and losing habits. After that, then you go to the manage piece. And managing is very reactive. And that's where a lot of your trust is going to be earned and lost as a leader. And so it's learning when you see selfish behavior, how do we convert that and use that as a teachable moment? And then when we see unselfish behavior, how do we reinforce that to where people want to repeat that? And then lastly, the most important piece, and this is where all your integrity and accuracy is going to come as a leader, is how do you model what unselfishness looks like? And so one of the best modeling tools that we've seen actually came from an athletic director that I worked with. He said that if I want my team to fill in the blank, then I need to fill in the blank. And so if we want our team to be unselfish, then it's your job as a leader to be the physical manifestation to show people what that looks like so then they can follow your lead.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a couple things I want to highlight there. The importance of modeling. It's so huge. We often create ourselves in our team, and if we don't have it, it's hard to expect them to have it. Will you say more about that managing piece? I think, like you said, that's a really hard piece. It's one thing to say this is our standard, this is our value, but then the rubber meets the road when I have to manage it and try to, like you said, convert it to winning behaviors or prevent those losing behaviors from showing up. What are you seeing coaches do that are doing that well?
I think anytime you have to rely on your authority, you disrupt the relationship. And the best coaches that I'm around, when they have to correct behavior and try to influence the future behavior, is instead of forcing compliance, they try to win influence. And when you do that, you then challenge people to find their best self, and it's their idea. And one of my favorite quotes from Daniel Coyle, there was a study where I want to do something versus I have to do something. I want to gets 400% better results. So the key to leadership is how do you unlock a want to find your next level to where they own it, it's theirs, and then they take that step in that direction.
Will you say more about that? How do you do that? What are the conversations that coaches can have? The questions coaches need to be asking to actually get them to want it? Because I think that's a thing that coaches can often struggle with or find frustration of, like, feels like my players don't want it and I want it more than they do.
I think that that's a really hard thing that the best teams I've been around, coaches are very, very competitive, but the athletes want it more than the coaches. And so you have to figure out how do you unlock the love to want to do the hard thing, particularly as a community, as a small group. I would say that anytime we're trying to correct future behavior, we believe in question based leadership. And it's just the art of asking questions. So, for example, let's role play. So, let's give me a situation that you see often, and I want you to be the athlete. I'll be the coach. And then let's just kind of play out a conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah, let's go with you've got a skilled player on your team and their effort in practice is not where it needs to be or should be for your team to be successful. And it's not just a one off thing, it's a fairly consistent thing. It's impacting your team.
Can we agree that sometimes if you don't practice well or practice hard, you can still play well? Do you agree that you're influential to our environment?
Yeah.
Do you agree that there are some people on our team that need the practice? So if they don't practice hard, they might not perform well.
Yeah.
So do you see if they followed you that we would not get to where we need to go?
Yeah.
So what do you think you need to do in order to elevate your teammates? And if you're not ready for that, like I totally get that because right now, eventually you're going to figure out that you're going to have to get better work habits because as the talent gap shrinks, you're going to have to figure out how you stay up with that. And those intangibles really matter. Right now, because you're a little bit ahead of the curve, you can get away with some bad habits. So the first thing you got to ask yourself is, do I want to find my next level as a performer? If the answer is yes, then we need to look at your work habits. The next question you need to ask yourself is, do you want to be a leader? If the answer is yes, the definition of leadership for us is how do you elevate your teammates? So you can be an example that's worthy of following. And if you do both of those things now, how old are you now?
17.
You're learning a really good lesson at a young age. And imagine if you can get some of these reps out of the way, what would happen as you transition into the next level?
Yeah, that's really good. We can pause the role play there. I can imagine how a 17-year-old now is thinking. Those questions get them outside of themselves too. The other thing I think is worth pulling out of what you just did, the questions you asked, is how you connected it to their future vision or their desires and goals. Do you want to get to that next level? Do you want to, right? Like that, I think is maybe the secret sauce in some of those hard conversations with players. Again, to your earlier point of like, they've got to want it. They have to want it too. And if you can connect it to something you know they do want, I think, like you said, it's much more likely to spur the action that we're actually looking for. Where it's, but we're not coercing it or forcing it. They're arriving at it themselves.
I think the job of a leader is to make it make sense. The only way you can do that is to understand what their motivations are. And then you're actually working at the source level because you might see some symptoms and that might manifest itself in selfish behavior. But they might think that's the only way I can get to where I need to go because this is what's bringing me attention at the current level, which at the next level, that might not be the thing that actually, that might work against them actually. And so if you can open their mind up to a new perspective, that then gives them a perception of how they view themselves. And with perception, as it changes, behavior follows, and the questions allow them to have self discovery. And there's not a manipulative approach. It's truly trying to understand, all right, how are you processing this situation? Meeting them there, and then just asking them questions, how they're processing the world. And then through that, they start to have realizations that then change the behavior to where they don't have to rely on willpower. One of the best things that happened to us is COVID um, really made us change the way we did our work. And it unlocked a new way of working with people because all of a sudden people became comfortable with Zoom. And one of the things that we do now is we ask questions and record the conversations. And the reason we record them is we send them password protected to the person that we're working with, the athlete or the coach, and we ask them to watch that as if they don't know who the person is talking, even though it's them. And when you distance yourself from yourself, you get clarity on your situation and you minimize the emotions that you might feel. And because those emotions are neutralized, you can see your situation in a sober way and start to give yourself better advice. And we all know that the higher you go, the more important it is to have self trust because the stakes are going to be, you can't rely on your coach to navigate that moment. You're going to have to navigate that moment. And you're giving them an opportunity to do that way before that moment happens to where they'll feel comfortable in that moment.
Coaches, I wanted to take a quick 60-second time out to tell you about 3 things. Number 1, if you want a free PDF of detailed notes on this episode or any episode of the podcast, subscribe to the Better Coaching newsletter for free today. Number 2, I want to invite you to join the Better Coaching community. It's a free online community of over 500 like-minded coaches from across sports. It's a place to interact with and learn from other coaches. We also have tons of free resources in the classroom section on leadership, culture, practice design, and more. Number 3, this podcast is fueled by RYG Athletics. RYG Athletics is a proud provider of Nike sports camps. We're always looking to add awesome coaches to our network of camp directors. If you're interested in learning more about this paid opportunity and becoming one of our Nike sports camp directors, we'd love to hear from you. You can find links to more information on all 3 things in the show details. Now back to the show.
What a practical thing that I think anybody could take. It's not even filming yourself playing or filming yourself coaching, filming yourself at a conversation and then listening to it again. Yeah, in this non-judgmental way, or kind of evaluating it as if it's not you. That's so challenging. I can totally understand why that would be so powerful for people. I want to talk about something that I know you've talked quite a bit about, and I think it kind of falls into this manage category as well around identity and standards of teams. You have a video where you talk about this process results matrix and how we can engineer next level feedback that doesn't get caught up in just reinforcing outcomes, because outcomes can be really random in sport, but feedback that stays focused on the process regardless of whether the outcome might be positive or not. Can you explain that matrix a little bit and why you think it's so important for coaches to embrace this kind of feedback?
I think when you get clear standards or a clear system of how you all are going to operate, that draws a line between a good process and a bad process. And this is a way to measure execution and see if the process, if we want to separate it from the result. So often we'll think, and it's a funny story, but we started a basketball academy when I was just coming out of college, and we would be locked into developing this footwork system, and we never even looked because the basket was here. We were just looking at the athlete and we were looking at the movement, the timing, those sorts of things. But if you look to the right, the parent was on the edge of their seat. And where were they looking? Whether or not the ball went in. And that's how they were judging the rep. And I think a lot of people do that, especially fans. If you go into a game, fans go crazy when the ball goes in. And when they miss, there's no cheers. And what we've learned is that if you can repeat a process, whether or not you're getting results, that shows competitive stamina. So the way the matrix works is it separates the process from the result, and it grades the fundamentals of the decision and the execution that you're making. So if a good process, the top left box is if we have a good process that doesn't get a result, that's a great rep. The ideal state is the top right box, and that's when there's a good process and a good result. And then when you go to the bottom, it's just a bad process, which is P negative is what we call it, and we are negative, and you don't get the result. The challenge in leadership is when you have a bad process and you're getting results. So the way we look at that is there's 2 boxes that have result alignment, and you can leverage the result to teach the lesson. I would not waste much praise in that situation or feedback in that situation. I would partner with the result. Where I would spend my time with praise and correction would be the other boxes, because the result is not reinforcing what the process is, good or bad. And so what we've learned is when the result doesn't reinforce a good process, you need competitive stamina. What we also learned is if that your process, like your example earlier, the athlete that doesn't work hard but still fills up the stat sheet, he needs to develop competitive maturity. And that's the ability to do the next right thing. And when you can teach from that vantage point, you can start to convert that to winning habits. And that was a way that we would try and delineate to where you could get off the emotional roller coaster, evaluate it scientifically, and just figure out what is the information that we need to learn to apply forward.
That's really good. I think it's such a powerful framework for coaches to use, and even just to evaluate ourselves in. is the feedback I'm delivering reinforcing the things that I say that we care about here? Because I think athletes, players, teams, they can smell BS really quickly. And if we say we care about one thing, but things we praise, the things we reward, things we get feedback on don't align with that, I don't think it sits well with them. I think it's a quick way to lose a team. Yeah, I want to shift a little bit in the conversation now, and I want to talk about coaches specifically and how coaches can be healthy people in the midst of these high performing environments that are often incredibly stressful and high pressure. There's too many coaches burning out, too many great coaches that step away because it becomes too much. I know in one of your videos at one of your conferences, you talked about kind of 4 dimensions of health. Would you talk about those and how you think they can benefit coaches, and any other thoughts you have on preventing coach burnout, coaches being healthier in the midst of these high performance environments?
Well, one of the things that I learned very quickly at my time with the University of Florida head coaches, we started a collaboration there. Most of the room had won national championships. And after winning a national championship, a large majority of them experienced depression after winning. And it became very clear to me that after championships that we should be staging interventions as opposed to celebrations, because once you get that into your veins, living at that level is very difficult because that's the expectation moving forward. And if that and it gets harder because you're not sneaking up on anybody. It's hard to do. People lose sight of how hard it is. So there's all these forces working against you. So the question I started to ask myself was, how do you find health in high performance? And the 4 dimensions, you guys could just YouTube it. I won't spend time deconstructing it on our What Drives Winning channel. The idea came from Dr. Jim Lair, and he broke health into 4 dimensions: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And what we learned is that if you can focus on those, then you bring a higher quality of energy to the engagement. And when that happens, you're very present, you're processing things as an opportunity, and it's for a bigger purpose than you. And when you stack moments like that together, oftentimes the achievement comes to you. You're not chasing the achievement. And it's a much more satisfying way to deal with the volume of work, because the volume of work is the price of admission. And then you have to figure out how you're going to tool your life to do that. Because if you won't, someone else will. That's how people become abnormal to the normal.
Yeah, it's really good. That's really good. I was looking back at my notes from the conference you guys put on a few years ago in St. Louis that I had the chance to attend. One of the sections in my notes was, oh, Gino was there and Mark Few was there. I get what, probably 2021?
Yeah, that was right during COVID.
Yeah, it was right after COVID. I think it was probably your first in-person one after that. One of the sections of my notes was coaches fighting the craving for approval and success. And I have this quote in there, and I can't remember who said it, if it was you or someone else, that the 24/7 coach is the insecure coach. Would you say more about that?
Well, it's also the inefficient coach. And when you have that much time that you're allocating to your profession, it's impossible to be efficient at that level. And so if you're looking to try and live a more balanced life, or at least a more multidimensional life, then you shrink your workspaces. And if you do that, and you like, the coaches that I work with are wired to achieve. They get itchy if they're not striving to be productive in some form or fashion every day. I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to that. So you're never going to like turn them off. You're just going to hope to turn them down. And the best way I found to see that is like just observing the ones that are highly productive, but still have time to tuck their kid in at night that are newborns, or get a nap in with them. They revolve their energy management around things that are most important to them. And they shrink the time that they're working to where they learn how to be more efficient. And when you do that, you can get high qualities of work done in an efficient manner. And not only that, you're modeling to people what efficiency looks like, to where you can get out of the office. I think that most coaches are wired to, or came from coaches that are wired to stay at the office. And like Mark Few said in that particular example you gave, who's a badge of honor. I think the modern coach understands that a fresh coach is a better coach. You see things more clearly. And you give yourself a competitive advantage when you have good energy because the clarity you bring to the experience. Again, you're going to have to walk alone to do that because the norm is not that, particularly if you're trying to do it at the highest level. People are going to try and tell you their way. They've had success doing it, and they're looking at it as causation. And maybe it's just correlation, but they feel like that is why it happened. And if you're trying to be like someone else, then what are you going to do? You're going to fall into that trap. And then the biggest thing I would encourage you to do is figure out what's most important to you, build a life around that, and then manage your energy to that.
That's really good. That's really challenging. Maybe the last question here, Brett, I'm curious on. I think you started to hit on it a little bit there, but I'd love to know if you have other thoughts or insights. Coaching is such an interesting and unique profession because your quote unquote performance, the results are on public display for your whole city, your whole state, your whole, whatever level you're at. It's on public display. And it's also this job where everybody feels like they know what it takes or can criticize it, but many of them have never done it. How are you counseling coaches, leaders? How do you deal with the criticism and pressure that comes from your performance being on display and so widely criticized?
Let's say it's you. Do you want people to be engaged with the program that you're building?
Yes,
Even if it means that it's going to come with criticism.
absolutely.
And what are we talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are powerful. Yeah. That's really, this is why you're doing this work. Those are such good questions. But yeah. I think it's hard for a coach to ask them that or to reflect on that. As you were asking that question, I was thinking about a clip of, I think it was Joe Mazzulla with the Celtics. Somebody was talking to them about a similar concept of pressure. He's like, no, we get to have this pressure. That's what they want. They're in this spot. That's what they want. I think it's a really powerful way for coaches to reframe that. Yeah, that's so good.
Point. I think the hardest part about that, and this came from Bob Stoops, is when they would lose a game that the fans did not think they should, there was a for sale sign in his yard. And the challenge with that is Bob is trained to deal with that, just like we talked about. The bigger challenge is the family for the coaches, because if you have kids, they're taking in those cues from the world. And so now you become a guide for them to help interpret the reality that they're seeing, because it's much different than maybe some of their peers. And maybe they hear about it when they go to school. And so I think the larger thing would be, how do you counsel the families whenever the person is in a really visible situation, to where they can then help use sport and life as teachers, to where here's our value system. When you walk out that door, you're going to get fed the exact opposite, and it's going to create some confusion for you. And by being proactive with that message, and as it happens, instead of them ingesting that as reality, you're at least creating the confusion where they have to pause and say, hey, actually, I was told that this is what's going to happen. This is exactly what's happening. And now they have a better chance at discerning that. So they don't inhale those things and then start to identify with their parents' profession more than they should. Because if that happens at a young age, and anyone will tell you this, they start to get oriented into outcomes. And there's nothing more powerful than when you as a coach can come home and your kids, if they weren't at the game, could not tell whether or not you won or lost the game. That is powerful. And that example is teaching them a lesson that they will carry on forever.
That's so good. I think that's an incredible spot to end it. Coaches will link the What Drives Winning website in the show notes and their YouTube channel as well. I would encourage you to go check out Brett and his books. Incredible resources for coaches at any level. Brett, really grateful for your time today. Thanks for sharing with coaches.
Thank you for having me.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. To learn more or connect with the guests from this episode, check out the links in the show details. And if you want a free PDF of detailed notes on this episode or any episode of the podcast, subscribe to the Better Coaching newsletter today for free. We'd also love to see you in our free Better Coaching online community. It's a great place to learn and connect with like-minded coaches from across sports. And finally, if you're interested in becoming one of our Nike Sports Camp directors, we'd love to talk with you about this paid opportunity. You can head to the show details for links to learn more about all of those things. Thanks for listening to the podcast.